One evening, me and my partner were called out to go investigate the source of a silent alarm being tripped at a warehouse by the boat docks. The area was known for minor drug activity, so we assumed that someone had broken into the building and was using it for a free place to stay. Normal stuff in this particular neighborhood. We figured it would be a quick in and out check, probably find nothing, then we'd log it and be on our way. Arriving at the building, the place looked shut up and tight and appeared to have been that way for quite some time. After we performed a walk around the perimeter of the building and found no apparent signs of a break-in, we decided to check the doors and windows to see if any of them were unlocked. Around the back, we found what we were looking for. Someone had found a way to get the door open and had free access to come and go as they pleased. We walked in the door and took in the open area. Although the warehouse was of good size, it was completely empty. Except for rubbish and burn marks here and there on the floor, there wasn't any sign that the place had been used for quite some time. There was enough light streaming through the windows for us to see the entire floor, and from what we could tell, there wasn't anyone here. I spot a group of doors against one wall I assume is some offices. Once we had checked in there, we could end this pointless venture. The doors were all unlocked, and as expected, the small offices were empty. I shut the door and my partner got on his radio and told dispatch that we had checked the building and had found signs that someone had been living there, but we found nobody in there currently. The response from the radio was so broken and garbled that we couldn't understand what was being said to us. Metal buildings such as this can interfere with the signal, so we both walk outside and radio for them to repeat what they had told us. "We're sending backup to your location to assist," the man on the radio told us. I didn't understand why they would be sending backup to an empty location that we had checked and found no one there. Can you repeat that, dispatch? "Sending medical units and backup to where you're at," the voice came back. I figured that someone must have misheard what my partner had told them. "No need, dispatch. The building was clear. There's no one there." The dispatcher's voice took on an edge of frustration. "I heard the woman's voice on the radio. Are you telling me that didn't happen?" From the tone in his voice, he must have heard something serious to be acting like this. "What is it you thought you heard?" "I don't think I heard something. I know I did," he said testily. "Fine, what did you hear?" "It was a woman. She was obviously in trouble from the tone of her voice." He paused for a moment, as if he wasn't sure he wanted to say the next part. "Officer Erickson, she was begging for her life." I was sure that the dispatcher had gotten the radio calls mixed up. There was no other explanation. The building had been completely empty. If there had been a woman's voice loud enough for the radio to pick it up, we would have definitely heard it. The implication that one of us missed, or worse, ignored someone who was in trouble, didn't settle well with me. The other unit and the ambulance were already on their way, so there was nothing to do but wait for them to get there, so I suggested to my partner that we take one more look around to see if we could find the woman that the dispatcher described. While we started going room to room again, I asked my partner if he had heard any voices while he was searching the building. "After we'd been together this long and you have the nerve to ask me that?" He was right, and I didn't blame him for being ticked off at the question. He was good at his job and took it seriously. If he said there wasn't someone there, there wasn't. We were still looking around when I heard the echo of footsteps coming from out in the main part of the building. We both walked out and greeted our fellow officers. We radioed in that we had made contact with the other unit and were going to do a thorough search of the premises. The guy came back over the radio telling us that he could hear the woman's voice. "She's there. She has to be right there. I can hear her." I immediately turned the volume down on my radio and froze. I didn't even want the sound of my breath to interfere with my hearing. Standing there for a full 20 seconds, all I heard was silence and the sound of the wind outside of the structure. I need to hear what this woman was saying. I gave the dispatcher my cell phone number and waited for the call to come through. It only took a few seconds and the smartphone in my hands buzzed, alerting me to the call. "Can you still hear the woman on the radio?" "Yeah, you can hear her, but it seems to get louder and quieter from time to time." "Okay, let me hear what she's saying." To this day, I wished I hadn't told him to do that. The voice was quiet and soft, but you could hear the fear in her voice. "Please, God, don't do this to me. Please, I swear I won't say anything." The statement sent shivers down my spine. If this woman was here, then we needed to find her, and we needed to find her now. I hold the phone up to my ear, and I wait for the next time she would speak. I didn't have to wait long. "Please, I have children. What will happen to my kids?" The four of us take off in the direction of the offices. There isn't any other place for someone to be. We're not trying to be quiet. Only speed matters now. A life seems to hang in the balance, and if we don't find her soon... I still hear the woman on the radio. She has broken into a fit of racking sobs. I can almost see her shaking from the force of them. The volume of her voice seems to increase as we approached the office doors. You'd almost have thought that she was right there on the other side of the door rather than it is coming from the speakerphone. We tear through the 4 rooms with as much urgency as we can without risking missing anything. I even put my head up to a wall or two, hoping that there might be some sort of hollow area where she might be. With only 1 room to go, we all converge on the door. The voice seems to be coming louder than ever as we walk towards the door. We all draw our guns, not sure what we expect to find on the other side. No matter what it is, though, we're ready. I grab the handle and push forward into the room, swinging it to the left as the officers behind me pour in, covering the other parts of the room. What we see in front of us, none of us suspected. The room is vacant. The voice continues to plead with her captors for a moment, and then for the first time since the call started, there is silence. I holster my weapon and walk around the room looking for any sign someone might have been there. Other than a large brown stain on the industrial carpet, the room looks like any other. My eyes dart back to the brown splotch on the floor. Do you think this could be blood? Might be. Have to get it checked out, one of the other officers responded. The whole incident had me spooked. The fear in that woman's voice was real. You couldn't fake something like that. The frequency that the radios we use aren't ones that can get their signals crossed where you might hear someone else's conversation like that. What I'm saying is that couldn't have happened like it did. Dispatch was totally at a loss to explain what could have caused it too. After the brown stain was checked, it came back that it was in fact blood on the carpet in that office. Whose, we may never find out, but something in the back of my mind tells me that the woman that we heard on the radio was the one that died there, probably shot. Her pleas went unanswered. No help came for her. I think she was reaching out through the radio to tell us what had happened to her there in that warehouse. I've thought about going back there, but I'm not sure I could handle hearing the fear in her voice as she begged for her life. One that would be in the end snuffed out far too soon. One afternoon, I received a call to see about a homeless guy that was causing some problems in town. He was an older guy that was known to be surly and pick fights with some of the other people. Because of his behavior, he was no longer allowed to live in the local shelters, meaning he was constantly bouncing from place to place. Everywhere he went, it seemed he didn't stay long because he would wear out the patience of the others around him. We had the pleasure, if you could call it that, of dealing with him a time or two. Neither time ended in violence, so we had inherited him as our problem to deal with whenever someone called in about him. Driving over, we picked him up a cup of coffee, seeing as it was January and he was likely to be cold. It was a cheap way of trying to calm him down and win him into our good graces quickly. Unfortunately, when it comes to someone who is homeless, they don't have a place where you can always find them. This guy, however, stayed in a relatively small area when he found a place to stay, usually a block or so, which meant we probably wouldn't have to look very long. In any case, most people that are in his position leave enough of a trail that we can find them pretty fast when we need to. As expected, it didn't take us very long, and we saw him leaned up against the side of a building, bundled up in some second or most likely fourth-hand clothes that were too big for him. When he saw us coming, he got up and started to walk the other direction, but he knew from the experience we'd just follow him until he talked to us. This was just his way of feeling he had a choice in the matter. After taking maybe 10 steps, he stopped and turned around and nodded at us, his way of telling us he would talk. A good start so far. My partner pulled to the side of the road, and I grabbed the hot beverage and got out of the car. "Hey Al, how you doing? Grabbed you a coffee." He looked at the cup and shook his head, declining the gift. "Stuff gives me heartburn. Gave it up." I wasn't going to push him. The guy had a lot of pride and didn't like the idea of charity. I'd leave the cup behind and he'd take it with him. Then it was just garbage rather than a handout. I shrugged and set the cup on the trunk of the car for later. After talking to him, he told us his version of what had happened that caused the altercation between him and another man. It basically came down to he accused the other guy of trying to steal something of his, and the guy denied it. It broke down when one of them, both had said the other one said it, called the other a liar. A pushing and shoving match had ensued, and someone seeing it happen had called us. Altercations like this are common in these situations. Everything someone like Al owns is precious to them, and they take it as a major affront if someone tries to steal it from them. These calls happen a lot, and the fights happen even more often. You just hope that someone doesn't get hurt badly when they do. In this case, though, neither one of them is hurt, except for their pride. With nothing to arrest them for, or even cite them, we ask him if he has anywhere else he can stay, maybe with a family member for a little while. He tells us that he could probably stay with a sister of his until the weather warms up. Trying to get him out of the area as quickly as possible to avoid any further incident with the other guy, we offer to give him a ride to the area. He grumbles something, but in the end, the cold seems to make the decision for him. During our conversation, he has commented on it more than once. His sister's place is a few miles away from where he is at now. We load him up, and I grab the coffee to give him later. He tells us that he wants us to drop him off a couple of blocks away from where his sister lives. It wouldn't look good with you showing up in front of the house and all. She's a warrior. We didn't want to make this a battle, and even if he didn't go, he was relocating, which would resolve the issue at hand, and we agreed. 10 minutes later, we stopped on the side of the road and let him out. I got out and set the coffee on the curb and thanked him for being understanding. He grunted something and walked down the sidewalk. I figured he'd come back for the drink once we had left. I just hoped that the time at his sister's place would give him a chance to change the direction the rest of his life was taking. That was the hope anyways. The next day, my partner and I had stopped at a place for lunch. It was a little diner that served pretty good sandwiches that we had the habit of going to often enough. He liked that we could read the newspaper while he was there without having to go to one of the stands and buy one. Although we sit together when his face is buried in the pages, we might as well not be in the same restaurant, so I'm surprised when he sets his paper down and taps me on the arm. Startled, I look up and see that the color has drained from his face. Something has got him pretty shook up, and I can't imagine what it could be. What is it? He roughly taps his finger on part of the paper. He is reading the obituaries, which is weird enough, but I didn't know who he could have seen that had him so rattled. I rotate the paper to see who he is pointing at, and a shiver runs down my spine. It is the homeless man from the day before. Only it says that he died 2 days ago. I read and reread the name again and again, trying to come up with some way to explain it. Maybe I read the date wrong, I thought, but I checked, and I hadn't. Somehow, the day before we had seen the man, the day after he had passed away. I wonder if he wanted to see us one more time before he moved on. I guess maybe because we were nice to him, he just wanted to show he appreciated it. That's what I like to think anyways. It was around 11 p.m. on a warm summer night when we were dispatched to a residence out in the boonies of Wyoming. The family there had reported some suspicious activity, so my partner and I went to check it out. When we arrived, the residents greeted us at the door and told us in harried tones about the strange screams they had been hearing, coming from a creek approximately 1,000 feet away. My first thought was that it might have been an animal. Out here, the slopes of the land can sometimes distort noises, and birds can sound eerie to a human ear when they cry out at night. But as we were talking, we all heard the scream. It's hard to describe exactly what it was like, but I immediately discredited the idea of it being an animal. It sounded human, and yet like nothing I had heard before. The closest thing I could describe it to would be the scream of a woman in severe distress, but far more high-pitched than anything I'd ever heard. Each scream lasted between 10 to 15 seconds, echoing eerily across the creek and to the house. My partner and I exchanged an uneasy glance and promised the family that we would go and check it out. It was a clear, mild night, so we walked rather than took our vehicle. Even with the moonlight above us, it was dark so far out from any civilized roads, so we brought out our flashlights. As we were walking, we heard the scream again, getting louder the closer we got to the creek. It was disturbingly eerie, hearing it come out of the dark right ahead of us. We swung our flashlights this way and that, but we couldn't see anything unusual. Either it really was just an animal, its screams distorted by the landscape, or someone was being attacked in the creek bed. There was no further evidence to suggest either was the case, but I wasn't about to rule anything out. The screams continued on and off as my partner and I searched the creek bed, each one fading like echoes in the mist. "Is anyone out here?" I began to shout, and my voice sounded strangely hollow as it moved through the reeds at the side of the creek. "Please respond if you can hear me." Nobody replied, but the screams continued. I didn't tell my partner, but I was starting to feel unnerved about the whole thing. Even though it was warm outside, I felt a constant chill on the back of my neck. I was impatient to get out of there, but we still had a job to do. We continued searching the creek looking for any animal trails or footprints, but there was nothing. It was then I realized that I hadn't heard the scream for the last 5 minutes or so, and began to wonder if whatever it was had finally left, or simply quieted down for the night. Then we heard it again. This time, it came from directly behind us. Until now, the screams had always been ahead of us, resounding through the air as though coming from a distance, but this one sounded closer than ever, back in the direction we had just come from. We quickly turned around, swinging our flashlights over the track we had just walked down, but there was nothing there. There was no movement either. Everything was eerily still, even the wind, and it almost felt as though my partner and I were the only living things out here for miles. Apart from the screams, everything else was silent. Being summer in Wyoming, you would expect at least some animal sounds, frogs croaking from the creek bed, crickets chirping, small animals rustling through the grass, but there was nothing. It was disconcerting, being out here in the darkness and the silence. Something about it just didn't feel right. We started heading back the way we had come, hoping we might stumble across whatever it was that was managing to evade our notice. We were almost halfway back to the house when the scream sounded again. It was so piercingly loud that my partner jumped, jerking his flashlight round to stare into the grass next to him. The scream had sounded disturbingly close, as though it was right on our heels. We shone our lights frantically around us, convinced it was close by, but we found nothing. Not even the glint of eyes in the darkness or the rustle of movement in the grass. If it was an animal, it must have been well camouflaged. By this point, the two of us were feeling antsy and impatient. I was starting to consider the possibility that our ears were playing tricks on us, and the noises we were hearing were actually coming from a greater distance than we thought. But the next scream was even louder than before, and it lasted at least half a minute. All of the hairs on my arms rose, and a shudder tore through my body. It was such a horrible, inhuman noise, and I wanted nothing more than to get out of there. My partner agreed, and we both hastened back towards the house. The family seemed disappointed we couldn't find anything, but there was little else we could do. We told them to call us again if the screams continued, and left the creek and its strange noises behind. We never heard from the family about the screams again. I still don't know what could have caused such strange noises. As an avid outdoorsman, I was familiar with animal cries, and those screams were like nothing I had heard before. I struggle to think of any sort of creature that could have escaped being spotted by our flashlights. My partner and I searched that creek thoroughly, and we found nothing. I don't think I'll ever find out what was making those screams, but it still gives me shivers every time I remember it.